Welcome, Logic students, to this week. Important announcement before we do anything else. After this week, you do not have to do any more of the homework from the logic book. Instead, your homework will just be preparation for the debate, researching those arguments that I'm giving you in these videos, and doing some research on arguments of your own. So just to be clear, you have done your last chapter of homework from the textbook. Finish this one up right now that you're turning in, turn it in, and that is it, okay? And this is to free up time. This isn't to let you off the hook and relax for the rest of the quarter. Instead, it is to give you plenty of time to do a really good, excellent job on researching those arguments for the debate. Let's go ahead and pray, and we will dive right into it. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Okay, as promised, last week we did a few of the arguments for the theist side. This week we're going to switch over and do a few arguments for the atheist side. Now, it is actually rather remarkable that really there's only one basic argument for atheism. It has a few different varieties, but they all amount to a core insight that is the main thing that a theist needs to address. And that core insight is, if God is the way that the theist says he is, then we would expect the universe to look different in a few important respects. Namely, we would not expect there to be so much evil in the world of various kinds. So we look out there at the universe, we see that there is such evil, and so that gives us reason to believe that there is no God, at least not the way that the classic theist thinks there is. Okay? Now, this argument takes the basic form of a modus tollens, the same way that the argument for the existence of God, the moral argument that I gave you last week, takes the form of modus tollens as well. In that argument, it says, if there were no God, then there would be no morality or ultimate meaning to life. There is such a thing as absolute or actual real morality. Therefore, there must be a God. If P, then Q, not Q, therefore necessarily not P. It's the same style of argument here. If P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P. It's just the P's and the Q's are different. Here, it's if there were a God, then there would be no evil. There is evil, therefore there must be no God. Now let's examine those steps a little more carefully, because it matters exactly how you construe them for what the force of the argument is ultimately going to be. There are two basic forms of the problem of evil. The first one is generally known as the logical problem of evil. Now, this takes the form of a purely deductive inference. There's a famous instance of this version, a kind of standard presentation of it, by a philosopher named J.L. Mackie. So you can get on Google, look up J.L. Mackie, Problem of Evil. You'll probably find that classic paper that many people have talked about and responded to. In that paper, Mackie says, look, the classical theist argues that there is a God and that that God has a few key properties. Namely, that God is all good. And Mackie construes all good as meaning if a being is good, then that being will prevent as much evil as that being is capable of preventing. It's a key formulation. Pay attention to that. Second, God is all-powerful, which means there are no limits to what that being is capable of doing. And then third, God would be all-knowing, meaning that every single instance of evil in the world is something that God does, in fact, know about. So Mackey puts all those pieces together and he says, look, logically, God knows about every single evil thing that has ever been done. Every case of murder, every case of torture, even every little tiny lie that people tell. He knows about it. He has the power to prevent those evils. And if he were truly good, he would prevent those evils. So as long as you acknowledge that there are evils like that in the world, one of those three properties has to go. Either God just doesn't know about these things, or somehow God is weak and he's not capable of preventing these things, or maybe God knows about them and could prevent them, he just doesn't want to, which would mean, for Mackey, that he must not be entirely good. So any way you slice the pie, this being is, if there is any being like this, it could not be described the way that the classical theist would want to describe God. Now, there are many responses to Mackey, and I won't fill those in. That's sort of the assignment for you to go and figure out what to say about that. But let me just point out that many people have since agreed that, okay, maybe we can open up a little bit of wiggle room for God, so to speak, logically speaking. It might be logically, hypothetically possible for there to be a hypothetical scenario in which there is a being with these classical properties that nevertheless coexists with maybe some small evil in a particular universe. And so this has led many people to sort of reformulate the argument as what's called the so-called evidential argument for evil. And this argument isn't so much the logical incompatibility of just even a little bit of evil and God, but rather the amount of evil and the extent of evil that we see in the actual world. Okay, so somebody who's advancing this argument, called the evidential argument, a famous version of this is given by a guy named William Rowe. So you can go Google that, evidential problem of evil, William Rowe, and you might be able to find some good resources. People that argue along these lines, like Rowe, they tend to say, look, okay, even if it's hypothetically, theoretically possible for an all-good, all-powerful, all-knowing being to create a universe that contains a little bit of evil, surely it's not possible for such a being to create this universe, okay? Just look around you. Look at how bad things are. It's not just a murder here or a murder there every now and then, okay? It's murders all day, every day. Every few minutes, somebody in the world gets murdered. Right? And the extent of evil in this world is horrible. If you just go read some of the stories about horrible things that people have done to other people, it's really mind-boggling. And so you might think, look, maybe it's somehow necessary for free will or for moral significance in our lives that God does allow us some freedom, but surely he could have intervened in the Holocaust. Surely he could have intervened in the torture chamber